Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We'll start Lodging During Disasters virtual discussion in just a minute or two. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Feel free to use the chat to say hello and let us know who you're with, and we'll get started in just a few seconds.
There's Miss Persia.
Hey, Persia.
Hey, you guys. Sorry.
No, you're good. We just went live. Welcome. All right. Those of you who have just joined us, thank you so much. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Feel free to use the chat to let us know you're here and your name. Welcome to Richard Koch from First Energy. We have Randy with Mid-State Electric. Welcome. All right, we have someone from the Army Reserves Family Readiness Assistant. Liz? Going so fast, I can't read it.
Persia, we told everybody that Bethany's going to give everyone the secret
Uh-oh.
today. And if she can't, you will.
Uh-oh. Let me check my secret file.
We have Carlos Torres. Welcome, Carlos. Bud Mertz. From Clark Public Utilities. Welcome. Well, as you continue to chat us hello, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. I'd like to welcome all of you to the All Hazards Consortium's Lodging During Disasters virtual discussion. My name is Laura Johnson. I'm a Director of Conferences and Events for the All Hazards Consortium. Just a couple administrative remarks before we get started. Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom to send us a comment, a question. You might even have a solution of your own as we go through the next 90 minutes. Feel free to use that space to give us that information. It goes directly to the staff and to the panelists. We are recording today's session, so you will all receive a recording of this webinar post-event so that you can share it with your colleagues and peers. We have close to 100 people on the line today, so I'd like to welcome everybody. And before we get started, I just want to introduce my boss, the Executive Director of All Hazards Consortium, Tom Moran. Tom.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everybody. Big topic. For those of you that aren't aware, about 18 months, or maybe 2 years ago, the consortium's Fleet Response Working Group, which is really run by the private sector and states, formed a use case committee. So everything within the consortium is solved by a use case. So lodging was one that year. We did pre-staging, locations, fuel availability, and lodging availability was a use case. So on that call, we had representatives from FEMA, multiple states, utilities, a few other organizations. And, you know, how do we coordinate on this competitive resource in the middle of a disaster? Doesn't matter what kind, West Coast, East Coast, you know, we've got them pretty much everywhere. But we zeroed in on hurricane season because it was a big issue. And we with our use case committees, they meet, the rule is you have 6 calls. If you can't find anything to work on or a solution, then you drop it. Or if you have something, you can kind of farm it out to people that do it. So this group came up with some really good ones. And one of them was kind of an agreement where FEMA and the states, I think Persia, you were on that call, FEMA and the states utilities were looking at, is there a way we could coordinate so that utilities could get in and out quickly, then FEMA could come in and do their, you know, the federal government folks could come in, coordinate with the private sector. Anyway, it was a concept. It just was too big. We didn't pull the string there. But here, fast forward to today, there's been some new storms, more powerful storms. Congregate sheltering is a big thing now, as we found out. We've been known for a while, but really found out last year, hurricane season. And there's some solutions, both on the government side and the private sector side, which you heard about today. So we're glad that you guys are on the call and listening here. And I want to encourage you, make sure you put your name or your information in the chat, because this will be the first of probably several calls we're going to have on this topic. We have an exercise committee. There may be something we do with that. And we're certainly looking on data of how we can do something, not just within a state, but maybe a region of states or a group of states so that we can move the ball on this one here. So thanks for coming. Laura, I'll turn it back over to you. I can't wait to hear from our speakers, and I want to thank everybody for participating in as speakers. This was, well, I think it'll be a great content today. So Laura, go ahead.
Thank you so much. All right, I'd love to start by introducing today's esteemed panelists. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about your role in the process of lodging during disasters and what in general your lodging needs are. So let's start with Josh Eckel with Dominion Energy. Josh?
Sure, Laura. So as you said, my name's Josh Eckel, and I work at Dominion Energy Virginia as the Director of Supply Chain Management. However, during storm response efforts, I serve as the logistics section chief of our incident command center. In that logistics role, I direct and coordinate the efforts of the teams that are focused on lodging, materials, and processing and staging centers. So, Tom, all those things that you previously were talking about, I get to be very actively involved in that during our response to a storm restoration effort. As far as our lodging needs, typically, as I said, they occur during storm restoration, and we're looking for beds for all entities that are participating in the support effort at the direction of Dominion Energy. So that's our own employees, line crews, wire watchers, contractors from off system, those mutual aid folks, as well as anybody that is supporting the effort in the field, as far as processing staging centers, fueling services. So everybody that's engaged in that effort, we're looking to make sure that they have beds in the evenings after a full day's work. We're really aligned with our resource management team, getting forecasts of those lodging needs. But typically for us, forecasting means 24 hours ahead as we see the storms that are coming. Unless we're fortunate, with Dorian, we had slower storms, a lot more time to prepare. But really, it's all about the how many, where, when, and for how long for us. And really, the challenges we see in our day-to-day efforts is just seeing that availability all over our system for lodging needs. It really turns into a hand-to-hand combat for us. We have a volunteer staff of, they have day jobs, and then during storm response, it's all hands on deck. We have individuals that are identified as lodging leads, and they're working on those efforts as well. So we've got a lot to learn from this group. Looking forward to hearing what others have to say and share our best practices. So thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate that. All right, next up we have Bethany Elliott from Alabama Emergency Management. Bethany, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, especially as it relates to the lodging process and what your needs are through the state of Alabama.
Sure, Laura. Again, I'm Bethany Elliott, the private sector liaison and state training officer with the Alabama Emergency Management Agency. I've been at EMA for 2.5 years, and prior to coming here, I served as emergency management coordinator for the Alabama Forestry Commission, working as a liaison to the planning section here at EMA. That's how I segued into this job here. While our private sector program is in its infancy, we're just getting that ball rolling. We've had an excellent relationship with our utility service providers through our infrastructure support branch for many, many years. And our role in disaster lodging concerning them really is just support. They have really good logistics sections and they handle a lot of their lodging, but from time to time, they do need assistance finding staging areas for base camps or some facilities that may be available, have rooms open, or be able to serve food in hard hit areas. So sometimes they'll reach out to us and we'll try to make those connections. More often, our work with disaster lodging centers around supporting the Red Cross, a partner in our human services branch. They stand up congregate sheltering and at times transitional sheltering assistance. And we work with them to try to get that going and provide them any assistance that they need. So that's where we are with sheltering.
All right, Bethany, thank you so much. All right, next up, we have Persia Payne Hurley with North Carolina Emergency Management. Persia, same question.
There I am. Hey, everybody. Good to be here. I'm Persia Payne Hurley. I'm the private sector manager for North Carolina Emergency Management. Also, I am the coordinator for the Business Emergency Operations Center, BEOC. As far as our particular needs, as you guys may imagine, we're a big hurricane-prone state, just like Alabama. And our needs are going to be for those large populations that are evacuating, especially from our 26 coastal counties, and finding safe sheltering for those people. We have a congregate sheltering program, like most do, which is mass sheltering. And with the pandemic, there became a huge need for us to keep those survivors safe from the spread, as well as safe from whatever the threat was for severe weather. So this need to really look at lodging. And in the past, we had done some, and I'll get into that later, but this time was very specialized. So our needs are very close to our energy partners and comms folks finding the safe bed out of the storm.
Thank you, Persia. And last but not least, we have Dirk Dreyer, who's the principal at Voyager Solutions. Dirk?
Hi, thanks, Laura. Thanks, Tom, and to the AHC for putting this on and for all the attendees that are here. My name is Dirk Dreyer. I guess I'm a solution provider, I guess, when I look at myself compared to the group. My background is I've spent 25 years managing mobile workforces around the country for large and small size companies. And around 2011, I got introduced through Con Ed to the disaster lodging needed in the utility space. Prior to that, had no understanding, just assumed you flipped the light switch on and it worked. When it didn't, you had a problem. Well, I had the privilege of convincing them that we could help them set up a better lodging program. And my first dance was Hurricane Sandy, and spent, I don't know, 6 weeks or so working directly with their section leader and sitting in their corporate office, managing all the needs that they had throughout that time period. And the way we handled it and the way we were successful, we got it done. But it's been in the back of my mind that there's got to be a better way to do this. And I think my role today, I guess, is to explain or share with you an idea and a product that I've created that I think will really address what I found were the shortcomings of the lodging process. Not that anybody was doing it wrong, just it's kind of like the repair crews when they go out in their trucks. You want to be equipped with the right tools. I want to provide the same opportunity for whether they're dark sky rolls or volunteers or whoever's managing the lodging needs. So I will talk about that a little bit today.
All right, Dirk, thank you so much. My first question deals with the challenges and issues you've had when it comes to lodging during an emergency or disaster. So Persia, if I can start with you, if you can walk us through what you go through when you have these needs and an emergency has happened.
Probably, and I'm going to say traditionally, since now the pandemic has made everything sort of strange and unique, the issues have been trying to, first of all, communicate well as far as the county's call to restrict an area or call for evacuations. That has always been something that has been difficult because our lodging later, whether it's hotel lodging or mass sheltering, has all been based on timing, and we all know how important that is. So with power crews coming in and FEMA coming in, that our cousins from FEMA, who I love to call the FEMA swarm when they come into an area because they're coming in numbers to, so there's this race for those rooms when we're looking at hotel lodging. So that is the big issue, that rooms are filling, that folks are all trying to be pre-positioned, including government and our critical infrastructure folks like power and comms. And at the same time, evacuees trying to find rooms. So it is musical chairs. And when the music stops, which is usually that window that's closing before landfall, everyone tries to be in a room. And so there is a huge race for a large amount with a high amount of demand. And usually few resources.
Persia, thank you. All right, let's move to our other state. Bethany, what about you?
Being a very rural state, our issue, Laura, sometimes is where the heaviest impacted area is and what's available there. A lot of our smaller areas don't have a lot of lodging to offer. So when you have utility crews coming in there, and our state utility crews do a really good job of not taking up rooms, but when you have help coming in from other states and you have to find somewhere for them, sometimes we have to go well outside of the impacted area to find lodging. And then for our non-service providers, for our private citizens who need lodging, trying to find areas where we can have the congregate sheltering, that's a challenge sometimes too.
All right, Bethany, thank you so much. Josh, we'll move on to you.
Sure, Laura. I think as an IOU, one of our biggest struggles is really, number one, you're forecasting where the impact's going to be. So for us, it's pre-positioning. Here in Virginia, we've got, the impact areas usually are along the coast, where you've got a lot of the vacation areas in North Carolina and Virginia. So you're always challenged with competing with those that are already in that area. So pre-positioning, and just in a proximity that we are able to respond quickly when the impact hits. And then as Brittany had mentioned, the other half of our state is pretty rural as well. So when you go inland, it's just the availability and making sure that once again, you're positioned such that from travel times for our resources as well, that you're able to make the most of your daily work hours prior to getting back to the lodging as well.
All right, Josh. Derek, I'm just curious if you, through your client experience, what issues you're seeing.
Well, in my experience, I worked first with Con Ed, and then I signed up Florida Power and Light, and I worked with ComEd, National Grid, and across each one of those entities, yes, we really monitored the weather and figured out what was kind of happening. We stayed in close contact with those people first and foremost, as Josh said, to try and understand what was happening. What I found, being the hands and feet, if you will, of our customers, was that lodging was location sensitive. There was limited supplies, and oftentimes the people executing it, that wasn't their core function. So it took a little longer than they maybe wanted. I really boil it down to the lodging challenges are, I think it's a manually executed process. I think it's labor intensive. It's slow, not really efficient, and the ability to garner and disperse information is not simple. And what I found, and I think, and my assumption today, is that most of the entities, organizations that are on this call today, when they're looking for lodging, the first way they do it is they pick up the phone, and they have to start dialing for rooms. And that takes a lot of resources. It's a very time intensive process. And so, as I said, what I have attempted to do and successfully created is a process that really takes the telephone, and instead of being the primary method of finding lodging, becomes the alternative or the backup. I've figured out a way to do it automatically. So, but I think those are similar needs. My assumption, whether it's a utility or a state-owned organization, they're all kind of dealing with the same situation, I think.
All right, let me pull on that thread for just a minute. What we found out in working with the utilities through our use case committee is they shut those websites down. When the bubble goes up, the public websites are not, they can't possibly keep up, and they close some of them, not down, they don't close them down, but they restrict some of that information. So a lot of people go there and there aren't rooms, but there might be rooms, you don't know. And so it's a relational thing, and Persia is going to talk about, because those hotels understand the optics that they're involved with, right? The need to shelter, get power on, get utilities on. They want to be accommodating. Hotels are in a tough position. And I think, Dirk, through your experience, you brought a lot of that relationship to the table, which brought that inside information we didn't really know as we started going forward. So note to self that when you're in the midst of it, the public websites may not have all the data you're looking for by design. They kind of do that because they have to hold back because there's life safety issues. There's issues ahead of other issues. So we don't prioritize that, but they do. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
it.
Tom, can I jump in for a quick second? To follow on your thought, all the major brands have what they call as a GDS, which is basically their central reservation system. That's what you're referring to. And typically what happens through a GDS is, they only allow you to book so many rooms at a time. And at the point where some sort of a disaster strikes, typically each hotel becomes their own island and they lift up the moat. And to be able to get access to those rooms, going to a central reservation system may provide you a few of the rooms that you need, but ultimately it's not the solution that you need. And you're right, at the end of the day, it's the individual relationships that you've got with the people that own and operate those hotels that are ultimately going to be the people who release those rooms to you.
The owners.
Owners, that's right, managers, the people, I call them the decision makers.
Yes. Sometimes they're on property and sometimes they're 20 states away, right?
Correct.
That's the challenge, right?
Right.
Okay.
All right, so moving on, and this is such a short webinar and there's so many more challenges that we haven't even touched on and so many things to consider, from crew and fleet movement to emergency procurement to inventory. But let's go ahead and move to our second question about how we've tackled the challenges that you experience in working with lodging. So Persia, let me start with you. How do you tackle those, and how do you measure what worked or didn't work to improve the processes that you use?
Well, Laura, I think I'll talk about two separate things. The first way is prior to 2020, the way we handled this was through our partnership in our state with the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association. The wonderful thing about having them as partners in our BEOC is that now we're talking to, as Dirk mentioned, owners and operators. That's who we're talking to. These are folks that not only are we able to get to dealing directly with them, but we get a greater insight on how their business works, what their big concerns are, and also multiple locations. So dealing with, say, 4 hotel groups that have multiple hotel locations rather than individual hotels, going by location, for instance. But what we did through the restaurant lodging group is we began to tap into real-time information on check-ins and check-outs and availability. And I want you to know that this was really, it was very interesting. It had not gone on in the past, but by sharing that information with us, we had a really, really clear idea of hotel availability, also hotels that were saying we're booked and we know we're going to be booked for the next 3 weeks. So don't look at us. When we were trying to place folks who were, say, coming into our state as mutual aid, either through from other states, doctors and nurses, looking for instance, hotel rooms to support shelters. This is just an example, knowing that Power and Comms and FEMA and all the other groups are trying to get positioned. So finding, say, those 40 or 50 rooms for those folks became critical. So working with those owner operators on understanding where availability was really critical to us. And it was something that we started to do during Hurricane Matthew. So about 2016. So before pandemic, that's kind of the way we operated. We were getting live data from them. If I understand, we were the only ones getting that. And when I say live data, I mean actual check-ins, check-outs in real time. So did that work? Yes, it did work. We were surprised at how well it worked because I'm not an expert on the hotel business. I know there's some folks here that are, but having to learn sort of how they operate was key. So I would say that it was successful pre-pandemic. After the pandemic hit though, when having to move the numbers that we were looking at, a little different, a little bit more challenging, and we'll get into that later. But just looking to house teams was helpful through the association.
Persia, you developed an app, or was there an app that helped you with this
Yeah,
information?
we actually developed something here. It isn't an app. It's actually interesting, difficult to describe, I think. We use WebEOC pretty heavily in North Carolina. You guys are all familiar with that, our crisis management platform. We use it very heavily. We needed to have a way of creating a system that was going to be useful in the event that we were trying to evacuate huge populations. With the pandemic, and obviously the guidance from the CDC and everyone else, you guys have heard that, it changed the way we did congregate or mass sheltering. I mean, social distancing and all of that. But the CDC coming out and saying the best situation would be private shelters or hotel shelters, something we call non-congregate shelters. I wanted to find a way to automate that so that we could have better control over those numbers and trying to tell people where to go and all these other things. And ultimately, I know some states use an app system, but I began to study hotels and how they book and what is accessible and what is not, and talking to owners and operators. So in a nutshell, what we did was we reached out to hotels in our state, and I know that my counterparts, many of them did the same, reaching out to many, many hotels. That was kind of the first step. And in doing that, just sort of give them an idea of what we had hoped to find. So developing those partnerships, and in those partnerships, telling them what we really needed to achieve to make it work. Well, we wanted them to consider giving us first right of refusal as the state. Will you give us state rate for these rooms? We even asked for a 72-hour hold. And we promised them that they would have single point invoicing for room folios, which is something that was very important to them. So at the same time, we knew that we needed to collect data. We needed to collect particular data points so that we knew in real time what we were working with. We wanted to collect information like how many rooms that you have available, emergency information like on backup generator power and elevators, king rooms, queen rooms, pet friendly, ADA, so many things to track. And as much as, I didn't want to get as deeply involved in it as I did, we had to design a way to give those hotel partners an opportunity and a platform so that they could get that information to us. So we did that. And we built a microsite that collected that data. It's very secure. They go in and input that. And this is information that owners and operators are giving to us. And it's difficult to find otherwise. And that data is then fed into WebEOC. So we've got that availability when we're looking at sheltering on where the hotels are, who's available. And I need to mention that through that process, they also sign that memorandum of agreement with us that agrees to all of that state rate, first right of refusal, 72-hour hold. But I also need to say that we have great communication with Duke and Dominion, our electric cities and our co-ops. We let them know, hey, we are going to go for non-congregate sheltering if it's going to call for that, so that they have an idea of what's going to happen here and what they can anticipate. Because the wonderful thing, and I know that my counterparts here listening, is it doesn't mean that we're taking over every hotel in the state. And I want to emphasize that, because if we decide to say, look at a cluster of hotels, let's say in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area, for instance, I can easily tell my counterparts at Duke, which would be, in this case, I guess it would be anyone on my panel, that, hey, I can tell you what hotels are available, and I can tell you their availability, and I can tell you that we're not evacuating to those. So I think there's a lot of good ways for us to collaborate.
Okay, Patricia, thank you so much. I appreciate that information. That's great. All right, let's move on to Bethany Elliott. Bethany, what about the challenges through Alabama, and what's worked for you, what hasn't worked?
Laura, as I mentioned before, our partnership with the Red Cross and their diligence and outstanding efforts in finding congregate sheltering prior to COVID, let me say, really helps us free up hotel facilities for the utility service providers and other workers coming into the state. We try to get private people impacted by disaster into the congregate sheltering And then that frees up the hotels for the workers. Last year, that was not possible. And mercifully, we did not have to use a lot of sheltering last year during COVID. So our experience with that was very limited. But we did have some hotel partners in the Gulf area that made their facilities available to us. And in working with our Rural Electric Association, they were bringing in some people out of state, and I reached out to one of our beach resorts down there and asked them, you know, are you up and running? Can you take people? And they were immediately, yes, we can. We'll fix them food. You know, we'll do whatever they need. We'll do laundry service. So in that instance, again, it goes back to, as Persia said, relationships, having those relationships, being able to pick up the phone or shoot a text message and say, what have you got? If you don't have anything, do you know who does? And they just respond really quickly. As far as how we measure what worked and what didn't, everybody uses an AAR, and we probably all don't use it as well as we should, but we try to have an after action review, and our utility service providers are part of that. So they get to feed us information on what works for them and what doesn't. And our in-state providers, again, have such a good logistical network that they can pretty much handle this disaster lodging on their own. However, again, with us just as a support function, they give us feedback on how we can help them better. And we try to take that and identify challenges and make some changes going forward. And that has led to us wanting to form a business emergency operations center, as Persia has come very close to perfecting in North Carolina. We'd like to get something like that going, and that came from feedback from some of our partners. So last year in COVID, when congregate sheltering wasn't available, and we did have those hotel partners who said, you know, we can do rooms and we'll work with you. We didn't have a system so we could do the one-stop shop on the billing. So we realized very quickly that was going to be an issue. So we're working on that. And hopefully, if this presents itself again, we'll have a better way of dealing with that, because that does make it a lot easier for the hotels when they can get one invoice instead of having for them to have to try to track everybody that's here and who gets the bill. And so we're trying to work on that.
Perfect. Bethany, thank you so much. Hey, Josh, how about you?
Well, I don't know how you follow up Persia and Bethany. That's kind of covered everything, but I will tell you from our perspective, you know, and reiterate some of the things that the previous panelists have mentioned. It really is hand-to-hand combat for our dark sky days resources that are really doing the lodging efforts. So it's really continuous training for them, making sure that they are aware of the systems, and we get new people all the time rotating into these roles, and making sure they understand the relationships that we've built. We really do. It really is important to develop those relationships with your corporate partners, Marriott's, Hilton's, and our account reps. That's usually the first call we make when we know we need a large block of rooms. It would be to that Marriott rep or that Hilton rep, because they have the visibility across our entire operating region, and will be able to help access that information, not what you're going to see on the internet, really what they have truly behind the scenes. So building that relationship, but you can never have enough options. So we continue to build relationships with local hotel partners as well. We have our community affairs teams here at Dominion Energy Virginia reaching out to local colleges, seeing what opportunities we may be able to leverage if needed in emergency situations. And as I think it was Bethany that mentioned, after action reviews are really a critical part of our process. So we always look at the end of an event, what worked, what didn't work. And in addition, we reach out to the hotels and talk to them about what worked during our lodging process, as far as check-ins, check-outs, swapping rooms, booking crews all together at one time so that we made sure that we had everybody in a crew in one location. So those are some of the logistical challenges that we face, but it's so important to continue to create that continuous loop of feedback from the hotels, from your lodging partners, so that you can always continue to improve that process.
Josh, and I'm glad you brought up colleges. I didn't even think of laboratories as an option, so that's very interesting. Thank you for that. All right, Dirk, you talked at the previous slide about the solution, so wanted to talk to you a little bit about some options out there for people who need solutions to their lodging issues.
Well, again, I come at this from having been, if you will, in the trenches, being one of those dark sky roles, working those incredible hours. Lodging's stressful. I mean, when those room requests come in, they don't always come in with a lot of lead time. And whether you're a utility or you're a government agency or something, I imagine the same pressures exist. And so I've been trying to figure out a way to improve the process. And I think I saw his name on the list. I was once at a conference with a gentleman by the name of Aaron Strickland, and went up and introduced myself. And I said to Aaron, I said, how can I help you? And he said, if you can find me a lot of hotel rooms quickly, I'm your guy, or I can work with him. And so that's kind of been sort of my goal off in the future, is figure out how to satisfy that. And honestly, I haven't been able to find a solution that exists, so I created one. And basically did a lot of research, as the other panelists have said. It's all built on relationships and doing research. Looked at what technology is available to try and understand how to keep this process really simple. The people that work these storm duty roles, they need a tool that's very simple, that is something that isn't overly complicated. You want to minimize the data entry, and that's where I've tried to drive my objectives in achieving those type of things.
And Dirk, you've also been looking holistically, right? You're not just looking at room side, but you're looking at on the back end for utilities. Who's your target, I guess?
Right. Yeah. So yeah.
Can you talk to that for a minute? Because
sure. The tool that I have built is really intended to manage the entire emergency lodging life cycle. It starts with trying to find out what availability is, finding where the rooms are, booking the rooms, and then after that, the storm subsides, everybody kind of breathes a sigh of relief. But then you've got what I call the great paper chase, which Persia said, you have one point of reference for the billing and so forth. And again, just based on experience, chasing down hotels to get that information is another storm in and of itself, and consumes a lot of resources that may be sort of hidden from view. And so yes, the tool that I'm building, which I'm kind of taking the approach of a friend of mine gave me this phrase, crawl, walk, run, as far as I want to make sure I have a really good foundation and kind of step through each one of these processes. And so the initial process I've done is the sourcing process to find the rooms. Now that we've got a good platform, now we can manage and build upon automating the booking process, and ultimately then capturing the source documents that, really everybody needs to validate their expenses and tie that back to what was requested. And if there's a rate increase, that can be passed on or something, you got to substantiate that. All along the way, you need to be able to report out, what the expenses are. And people have mentioned, what rooms are available, what have been assigned, what have gone unused. There's a lot of factors, and a lot of within the whole lodging process. I think there's a lot of value that sometimes gets passed over just because there isn't enough time or a good tool to see it and identify it. And so I'm trying to create a tool that really optimizes that lodging, that whole process, Tom.
Yeah. I had a question for the states. Why is it important the states stay involved in this, right? Persia, you don't have 35 people doing this full time, right?
No.
Bethany, last I checked, Bethany, you didn't have it. So, but can you speak to why it's important that the state's involved in this, right? Because I think a lot of people think, well, why do I need to work with the state? I can just do this on my own, which is true, they can, right? But I think it's important to get your perspective, both you and Bethany, on why the states need to be part of the coordination with FEMA and the utilities, and not just, states all by themselves. But maybe you can speak to that for a minute.
Is Bethany speaking?
Bethany,
No, you go ahead, Persis.
I think that, I mentioned a little bit of it earlier. If you are a large company, especially the utilities, and you're not communicating with a state when you are monitoring a known event, say a hurricane, but it can be any event. And we're talking about a known event. I guess it can be a no notice as well, but speaking to a known event, if you're not communicating with them, you don't know if they're going to declare a state of emergency, when they're going to declare a state of emergency, what they anticipate in terms of collaborating on information as far as what you anticipate the impacts are going to be, because that's typically what's going to drive that response, at least the build up to the response. Folks trying to decide, do we need mutual aid? Do we need to bring them in? Where do we need to place them? All of these different things. So that pre-landfall, that before the storm activity that happens where everybody's moving around and trying to get positioned and pre-positioned, if you're not communicating, you can run into a lot of problems, especially if a lot of government-driven activities are happening, such as the Department of DOT. The DOT is moving. The National Guard is moving assets. Other folks that are government-related are moving assets. These things can get in your way. Not to mention, you need good information on roads that are going to be closed for whatever reason. Maybe roads that are going to be opened even though they were under construction before. So just getting a good lay of the land on where you can go, where you can move. If you're not communicating those things, you're going to run into a bunch of challenges. And as I mentioned, we're going to be sharing information with, say, Duke Energy, Dominion, our co-ops and other folks to let them know that, hey, you can anticipate us looking to these particular hotels in this particular area for what we're expecting, so that we don't bump heads in this process. Right now, we have the ability to put our hands on roughly 8,000 rooms. Now, I call that, I talk about those as being on the ready line, meaning right this minute, if I had to, I could put my hands on 8,000 rooms. Now, that not to mention the potential of 33% roughly occupation, because now that COVID has changed things and we're reopening, there could be some occupation there. But that number, from our numbers now and the partnerships that we've extended to, we can expand that number to about 19,000. Well, 19,000 rooms is a lot in North Carolina, and we appreciate those partnerships, but we don't want to take away from folks' ability, obviously, to position folks that are going to give us critical services. So the communications there are going to be so critical before the disaster. Who is speaking? When are you going to activate? We provide that information to our partners. And I think that folks on the call should be touching base with their state folks to find out if they can get that information. If they know that there's going to be a declaration 24 hours before there's a state of emergency, that's big information for folks that are moving equipment, operations, and people. So I hope I answered.
Yeah, no, Bethany?
I agree. It's the communication component that the state brings. We're like a central repository for communication that you may not be able to find on the web or through your hotel contacts. And I go back to, in rural areas, while it's great to have contacts at the big, Hilton, Marriott, those type places, if you're coming into Bruton, Alabama, let me tell you, they don't have a Hilton. So you're going to need to know the person that knows mom and pop who own the hotel in Bruton, Alabama. So that is where the state can provide some support.
Thanks, Bethany. So we pretty much addressed our question number 3, which was our next question, but I want to ask Josh to step in here too and talk a little bit about who you work with during the process and how that works out for you.
I think really, as Persia mentioned, it's really important that we coordinate with the state emergency management teams. And it's really just about being aligned and understanding what everybody's expectations are, what the next steps are. Additionally, we do, and Bethany, it's funny you mentioned the mom and pops. We actually have a bed and breakfast that we use repeatedly in North Carolina, and the owner only accepts a check. So, those are relationships that you really have to manage throughout the process. But really, to go back to your question about that integration between the public and the private sector, we have an emergency preparedness center liaison that is meeting on a daily, 2 times a day basis with the state emergency management groups to coordinate our effort, to make sure we're aligned. They understand that from a utility perspective, the critical infrastructure that we have to support and make sure that those facilities have priority for us and priority for the state is aligned as well. So, like I said, it's really that continuous conversation with those groups.
All right, Josh, and moving on to the next question, I'll stick with you, Josh, on this one. So what's next for you? What's left to be done? What are your next initiatives?
I would tell you that high on our priority list are a lot of things Dirk is talking about. It's really automating. How can we be much more efficient? This is, you end up spending a lot of time in a short period of time trying to coordinate all the efforts of finding available rooms, booking them, assigning them, repositioning colleagues, so swapping people in and out of rooms. And if we could automate that, the more we can automate that, the better.
Josh, thank you. Bethany, what about you? What's next in solving the issue of lodging during disasters?
Well, I would like to set up a little bit more extensive relationship with our in-state utility partners. We do have an emergency management liaison from those agencies who works with us in our EOC, but I would like to make a connection with their logistics group and see how they go about arranging their lodging needs, so that, when we're in a pinch, we can communicate and work directly together instead of having to work through other people. And we can communicate and coordinate a little bit better as far as getting them what they need and making sure that there's still availability for others that might need it as well. We want to continue our relationship with the Red Cross and our State Department of Human Resources, because what they do as far as handling the private citizens in the congregate sheltering is invaluable, and they have it down to a science. And so we will continue that relationship and continue to support them in that. And I was remiss in not mentioning our staff here in our Human Services branch when I was talking about who we work with, because they do an excellent job in coordinating with the Red Cross. And what I do and what we do in infrastructure with utility companies couldn't happen if they didn't have such an outstanding relationship on their end. And then continuing to strengthen our relationship with our community college system. That's who we use for congregate sheltering, and could possibly use for non-congregate sheltering if needed. We have a lot of community colleges throughout the state, and they have dormitory facilities available. So we want to try to strengthen that relationship in case there's a need to use some of their facilities in the future.
Very good, Bethany. Thank you so much. Persia?
I think for us in the immediate future, we're going to be looking at whether or not, how long. We spent a lot of time building this platform and automating, as Josh mentioned, it has been critical, especially when you're looking to place, say, 6,000 evacuees or something, big numbers like that. When the pandemic is over and when things turn back to our new normal, how will we then use this platform that we've built? And it's been very useful for this particular case, but already what we're finding is those relationships with those hotels, they're going to go on forever. It may be our open door to help our utility folks and our other folks that are looking for bringing in big mutual aid crews to help find those rooms, because we already have those established relationships with those owners and operators. I mean, that may be one way. I know that my agency is looking at how else can we use this because we've built it at this point. And although we may use it this hurricane season, it's really going to be dependent on, FEMA approving for us to do that. So it may be we've, built the mousetrap and have a, very limited time that we can use it. So we will be looking for other ways to use this platform now that it's built.
Great. Thanks, Persia. Mark, what's next for you?
Well, I'm going to roll out, my product is called Room Surge, and it's going to roll out after the 4th. And, my goal, as I said, is to crawl, walk, and run. And I've got a whole parking lot of ideas that once we got, I think we have the sourcing and finding of rooms tackled. Work through automating the booking, automating the room reconciliation. The tool that I'm building is going to be designed so it can be self-service. So whether you're a utility or you're a state-owned agency or a federal government agency or whomever, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to outsource the whole product. I'm basically trying, as I said, give you the tools that are on the truck so you can do the job as effectively as possible. And the real key is just to continue to build those relationships, understand who's available, and make sure you have current contacts. I forget who mentioned it a minute ago, but yeah, there's only a finite number of hotel rooms in all areas. And, at one point I did a study for one of the utilities and actually looked at what the occupancy was in key areas where they have a lot of damage or traditionally have. And we use that data to try and anticipate, if they had 1,000 rooms potential in around a staging site, and if they're running 70% occupancy, you can figure out how many rooms are really available. And, information is power, and being able to make decisions quickly, ultimately we're trying to work ourselves out of a job here, right? If the power goes out or there's a damage, you want to get people in and taken care of and get them home. And, so I'm looking forward to rolling this out. And it's not just something I think that will work for a utility. I think it will work for, really probably a lot of the different agencies that are represented here, because at the end of the day, your basic need is you're looking for lodging. And I think, I don't know, it's exciting. So we'll see how it develops.
All right, well said, Mark. Thank you so much. We always like to end our webinars, or at least the questions to the panelists, by asking them what recommendations they have for the listeners on the line, and give them advice. So Dirk, let me start with you. What would be the one thing you can advise our listeners on the line today?
Well, it's going to go back to what I just said. It's all about relationships and knowing what your options are, and any of the homework that you can do in advance of needing it is so critical. The last thing you want to be doing is Googling on a map, trying to figure out where's the Girl Scout camp in relationship to the Holiday Inn, because that's all that's available. I truly believe that there's a more efficient way to do it. And I think people ought to just, whether it's my solution or another one, I think you need to explore what's out there, because I think there's some good ideas that I think really can help tackle this immediate need when it arises. So I guess that's where I would leave it right now.
Thanks, Dirk. Josh, words of wisdom?
I tell you, Dirk, you summed it up really well. One of the things I would say would be recommended to ensure that you have that visibility real time throughout the emergency response to what your true assets are, what you have reserved, what you are utilizing, and what those costs are going to be. For us, as a IOU, we don't want to wait to the end of the event to estimate what the cost was for us. You need to have it real time as you're running through. Obviously, we're going to do whatever we need to do to make sure that we have lodging for our resources. But having that information at hand is really important. So anything that you can do to improve your reporting, those type of tools should be focused on.
Perfect, Josh. Thank you. Bethany?
Well, I would recommend connecting with your state emergency operations center your organization may have a liaison in the Emergency Operations Center. It's always interesting to find out that some entities don't even know they have someone who works the Emergency Operations Center during a disaster. But find out if your organization has one, and if they do, work through that person. There are a lot of resources that the state has. Most all states, their Department of Transportation updates their, in Alabama, we call it Algo traffic, to give you an idea of what's open, what's clear, what roadways are blocked. So that's a good resource. All of your state's governor's offices normally put out information. States have a 211 or a 411 or 611. All of them call it something different, but there's some kind of informational website for people during disasters, and even not. They'll have good information up there in blue sky days. So the state is, I know it's that old cliche, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, but we really are. We try. So there are some good resources, and if you can't find them on your own, reach out to your emergency management agency and they can help you find them. And I guess, like the others said, just, homework, any kind of work that you can do ahead of time to identify resources. There's a really good fleet management or fleet movement app. Tom can speak on that. Their states are communicating better as far as when waivers have been issued and emergency declarations have been issued, so that can be communicated into one place, so fleets know where they can move and the best routes. So just research, find your resources, and if you need help, let us know.
Great advice, Bethany. Thank you. And last but not least, Persia.
Hey, yeah, guys, I'm from the government, but but you can judge whether or not I've helped at all. I'll say that. Regarding my recommendations, a couple of things. You guys have heard us say relationship. People say a lot about that, but that engagement, keep in mind that it has to be ongoing. You have to do blue skies. You have to do gray skies. Nobody wants to do it on the fly, but I think everyone on this call has done it in the past. I know I have. I would say that regarding the lodging, don't be afraid to ask. If you know that you need to meet specific levels in terms of costs, or you need something really weird, like when I asked for our hotel partners for 72-hour hold, I don't know. I didn't know if I was going to get that, but to have so many of them, well over 200 now, agree to that in writing was huge. To agree to state rate in writing, huge. First right of refusal. Who thought we were going to get that? But pushing the envelope and asking, you need to ask those questions because you don't know what's possible. So explore those. And I would say find the win-win when you can, because those lasting relationships, if a hotel owner knows that you're going to come to them first, if you're in that state, that might matter to them. If you're going to book entire hotel or entire floors, that may matter to them. And I would also say that, look at the way your organization responds and how you move and how you preposition, because that could be key with the kind of hotel relationships you need. So I hope that helps. I think that if you know more about, what you have to have and those limitations and what those minimums are, then you can get further when you're asking a hotel to work with you or to treat you, differently than they do, the public. I certainly wish that there were folks like Joshua and Dirk that would have been able to, if they were already set there ready to jump in when COVID hit, but who knew it was going to hit, when we start to look around to try to figure out what in the world are we going to do. And so leaning back on what we knew our folks were going to need and asking those hotels, building those relationships, that's how we got some of these agreements that otherwise I don't think we would have gotten. So that'd be my recommendation.
Persia, thank you so much. That was great. We still have some time for questions. So I would ask the people on the line, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please use either the Q&A or the chat function. And we're going to stick around and answer any questions you have. And in the meantime, I'd love to thank Josh, Bethany, Persia, and Dirk for their excellent input on today's webinar. I really appreciate it. And Tom, I think you have some remarks you'd like to make. You're on mute.
Thank you. I put it in the chat. For those of you that haven't, I would encourage you to register with the private sector's SICE. That's the Sensitive Information Sharing Environment. Why is this important? Because when we had our use case committees, we were getting into some pretty sensitive information, and the SICE is protected from FOIA and all this stuff. So we do this as a way to vet people, but a way to have these real serious operational questions, right? So if you haven't done so, it's free. There's no cost. I encourage you to register there at siceusa.org. Second thing that one of the takeaways that I see is that this is one of those complex problems, right? Somebody said, well, why can't you come up with a universal solution? Because there's about 40 organizations that all compete for the same thing, right? And there's people doing good work. This is the problem. This lodging is multifaceted issue, right? And Bethany, I love how Red Cross, a big partner, we don't need to confuse their process, right? We need to know that process, right? So it's one of those issues that it's going to take humans working and trusting and coordinating, and then technology will emerge, kind of what Dirk, we found Dirk through utilities that we work with. And I know on the utility side, a lot of people don't know that, Josh, but you don't have full-time room people sitting around, right? They got storm job, and all of a sudden the storm hits, and now you're the lodging person, and so it's a complex problem, but I think discussions like this can really help. And I was curious when we do after actions, maybe some of that can be shared back with the group. There's a lot of groups we haven't heard from that probably need to chime in on this as well. FEMA, DOT, like we talked about some of the federal agencies, certainly the nonprofits, so forth. But like I said, we can go a lot deeper, but I appreciate all of you taking the time to do this, because it is a big thing. And now, especially with congregate housing becoming more and more and more prevalent during disasters, that's different. And one last comment, each state has their own process and how they do it. So depending on how often they activate, like I tease PERS all the time, it seems like they're activating. You can count hurricane season, North Carolina's going to declare at least twice, right? Not every state's in that position. So North Carolina's innovated beautifully because they had to, right? This was not an option. And every other state's a little bit different. But what's great is PERS chairs a group of states working together that share this information. Bethany's on that. And it's great to see the states working together. And so I think lodging will be one of those things, Persia, on the text chain, maybe. Let's go back. Who do you know here? Who do you know there? So anyway, right now it's a multifaceted solution environment.
So we did receive a comment that I wanted to bring up from Robert Harder. To not only are they looking for rooms, but also needing to know the size of the parking lot for the utility crews. That's an important thing that I wanted to bring up. But
that's a great thing to identify, Laura. That is something we actually every hotel or bed and breakfast that we reach out to, we ask them about parking availability.
Yeah, smart question.
Parking for what, Josh?
For bucket trucks.
What size?
For how many?
You're not talking about a Prius, right?
That's right. Outdoor parking often, right? If they're haul trucks, but
I bet you had some good stories behind that one.
Absolutely.
So
say, Laura,
yeah.
One other thing that I guess in my own research and my own experience I've come across is, all these first responders, I guess I'll just refer collectively everybody as that, lodging's not only a key challenge, but sometimes food is as well. Being able to find out who's open, what they serve with COVID, is it box lunches, is it a buffet, or at least that's what it used to be. That might be a topic for another discussion at some point. The other one that I guess I've run into in my own experience is transportation, and trying to, in a very large disaster, whether it's a hurricane or something like that. I remember watching in New Orleans, all those buses that had to be coordinated to, move people in and out. And I even experienced that in Hurricane Sandy, seeing as the transportation group was sitting adjacent to me and listening to their challenges. I mean, all those things have to kind of hum together. Otherwise your orchestra doesn't sound great.
Sure, absolutely. We do have a question here for Bethany or Persia. Do the state government agencies think about utilizing tent cities?
I think if you're asking whether or not survivors for tent cities, I think that's what they're asking. You know, people have thought about that. Honestly, the biggest issue with putting survivors in tents is the optics on that. Most local mayors, as well as the governor and others, you know, don't really feel comfortable about putting survivors that have already been traumatized, that they've had to evacuate and leave their homes, or their homes are damaged, and now they're in a tent city. Although, you know, I might be comfortable in a tent city, but I kind of, you know, spend a lot of time, you know, digging foxholes. So, but others may not. So I would say that that's why you don't see that. Especially when keeping in mind that a lot of those survivors have special needs. They're older people, or they have small children with them, and it just does not lend itself to a perfect situation. It is more, in my opinion, of a first responder option, or teams of volunteers, folks that are certainly able-bodied and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I agree. Some of the utility companies have some tent type situations or portable buildings that they set up and move as they go, if they're only going to be there for a short time. But as far as putting survivors in tent cities, that's not an option that we would want to consider and to weigh on down the list.
Thank you so much. We don't have any other questions that came in, but we are getting a flurry of comments for our panelists to say thank you for the information. Some have asked if we can share your contact info. So let me know about that, and we can pass it along when we send the link to this webinar as a follow-up.
Yeah,
Laura, I saw a comment on churches, using churches for parking lots. And I did want to mention that we should shout out to our churches and non-governmental organizations, because while they can't house usually, they will let you use their parking lot, and they will feed you, and they will feed you well many times. So we really do appreciate our relationships with our religious organizations and community service organizations. They're great partners.
Thank you for that, Bethany. Onward, did you have a comment?
No, I was going to ask Josh if he had a comment. At your Hollywood Squares box lit up and then it went dark again.
No comment, but I was responding to Laura. Go ahead, share my contact information. That'd be
Okay.
great.
Wonderful. All right, great. So I will do that. Sorry, I'm reading through the chats that are coming through pretty quickly here.
I think as we plan going forward, we have some webinars coming up, and we have an annual meeting in January, 25, 6, 7. It'll be virtual. And I just made a note. This would be a great discussion to come back, you know, post hurricane season on this topic. Maybe have something between now and then on it, because I think we're going to see some movement. I think the states are all improving their process. Dirk might have some development. We'll see. But I know it's a big issue. Look at we had a big webinar today, and I know a lot of people couldn't get here, but appreciate all of you putting your time and energy. And there's many more people out there working the issue besides those of us here on this call, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
We will, like I said, we started a use case committee on that. We paused because we couldn't find a quick solution. One was a policy, one was a process, and one was Dirk. For the utilities, right? So you got tagged there as a guinea pig there. But it is a big one, and I really appreciate the innovation on the state's part, and they're working together. Behind the curtain, the states are really working together on this, and people want to help, they just don't know. So the more they know, they can be part of the solution. So.
Yeah, Tom, and our website is ahcusa.org, which is the back half of my email. But if you're attending this webinar, you're on our list to receive the information about the upcoming webinars and that Business Resiliency Summit in January 2022 that Tom just mentioned. So we'll be sure to send that to you, as well as the link to today's webinar and contact information for our speakers. So I also wanted to give my email at laura.johnson in case you have any questions, if you have any solutions, or if you'd like to even present a webinar of your own. And it looks like I'm having some people raise their hands. So let me see if I could. Here we go. Aaron Strickland, you should be up now. Aaron, did you have a question?
You're on. Here we
No,
go.
sorry, I hit it by accident.
Okay. All right, no worries, guys. So I think that's all for today. Again, thank you so much to our panelists for presenting this information and how you've addressed some of the challenges when it comes to lodging during disasters. And to our listeners today, I hope you found today's information valuable. Thank you so much for attending. We look forward to having you at our next webinar. Everyone stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.